Welcome, Simon. So we've got Simon Bennett today on our Problem Solve podcast. So this is our first episode of season 1 on our podcast, and we're starting on the top shelf. So thanks, Simon.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm so pleased and privileged to be on the first episode.
We were really grateful that you spare some time, come and spend some time with us this morning. So I thought I might start with a bit of an introduction to maybe OMB Solicitors. So you've been a partner there for almost 10 years now or more.
1993.
1993, wow.
A long time. I'm giving up my age a little bit there. But yeah, I have been, I've been at OMB since 1993, and I think I was a partner in 1996. So
wow.
Yeah, it's quite a long time.
It's an impressive career as well. You've grown the business to, I think you've got close to 50 staff now?
65.
65, wow.
Yeah, when I started, we had about 11. It was O'Keefe and Marnie in those days, and the two partners, Peter Marnie and Aidan O'Keefe, have subsequently retired. But the current crew we've got there are fantastic, and we've got a really good breadth of experience and skill set, which is fantastic. And unfortunately, I never really wanted to get bigger necessarily. I wanted to get better.
Yeah.
But part of getting better is getting bigger because the demand for our services has grown, and so we need more people.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point because I know we sort of interact in business across multiple different disciplines. You can help clients with wills and estate, family law, construction and property, litigation. You've sort of got all the bases covered now.
Yeah, that's right. And particularly in the type of work we've done in conjunction with the MG Group is things like having a specific body corporate team, headed by Juliet Nan, who's just fantastic and knows that body corporate space so well. It's really nice to be able to lean on that when you're doing a development, to have someone who can come in and draft the CMS or the BMS and get it really specific and correct.
Yep.
It's good.
It's good, and it works for us as well because we've got your team there for the construction issues, and then also on the sales contracts and putting that together. It's a team. We can put a legal team in place on a project for everything.
Yeah, and lawyers, you don't often hear the term working collaboratively with your lawyers, but we tend to be able to do that. So part of my property team work is that, unfortunately, from time to time, we will have disputes, and I'm sure we'll talk about that today. But to be able to go over and see Cameron Marshall, the partner in the litigation, and sit down, and he's got the negotiation or the litigation hat on, and I can bring in the property expertise, and together it becomes quite a formidable team.
It does, and I guess that's why I wanted to try get you on the podcast, mate, because I think your strategy with that and working with you on other projects and how you see solutions and problems is really good. You've got a wealth of experience, and I kind of wanted to explore that today if we could.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to finish off the introduction as well. As well as being a partner at OMB, you're on the board of the Suns Football Club, and also the Community Fund.
Yeah.
Gold Coast Community.
Gold Coast Community Fund. Yeah.
Yep. And you're also an accredited law specialist as well.
Yeah, accredited property law specialist.
Yeah.
So that is part of what I do. But I love being involved in the community stuff. And Gold Coast Community Fund, I've been on that for a long time. It's a wonderful local charity. It's Gold Coasters helping Gold Coasters, and we're trying to getting people who slip through the cracks. And we do some really, really wonderful work, and I love that. And the Gold Coast Suns Football Club, the AFL team, I think a strong community, and one of our values at OMB is community and people, and is that a strong community has strong sporting clubs and sporting organisations. It's good for community. So I love being involved in that, absolutely passionate. And we're going to have a great year this year, and it's going to be a massive success.
Yeah, nice. I don't know how you find all the time to fit it in, mate.
Get up early.
So one of my first questions for you this morning is we've seen a lot of turbulence in the last 4 years in the industry, during COVID and then specifically after COVID. I mean, we've had a bit of a roller coaster on projects, and I know, specifically we've worked with your team on a number of projects where we've had some challenging situations with builders going insolvent, and then picking up the pieces and carrying on. I think, we finished one project with you guys, and we're actually working through another at the moment where you guys have been absolutely instrumental in us taking a project from a crisis situation to it being okay. What would you see in that insolvency, that situation where we've got builders going under? How many other clients have you seen being affected by it in the last, say, 12 to 24 months? And what are the key sort of things you've observed in terms of protecting your clients legally?
Yeah, it's a pretty complicated question. Obviously, the marketplace has created a situation whereby there has been sharply escalating building and construction costs. And that has put a lot of builders, particularly, under pressure. And unfortunately, with sharply rising costs that may not have been factored into a contract, if you've got a fixed price contract, there has been financial distress on builders. And that has caused a number of problems, not only for the builders and the developers, but also for the contractors who may face a situation that they're not getting paid. And, if the builder goes into liquidation, then all of a sudden the contractors are dealing with the liquidator, and that can be a process in itself trying to get paid. So that's certainly a difficult one. In the situation that you've indicated where, for example, we were acting for a developer and their builder faced financial pressure and couldn't finish the job, then we've got to find a second builder to come in and pick up the pieces. And that builder coming in, they've got some concerns because they don't know what has been done or how it's been done on the work quality to date. Yeah. And they need to be really careful contracting either in or out of risk on what's already there and what they're required to do to complete the job. So it gets quite complicated for both your developer and your incoming builder. So the contract process, and you're going to hear me talk a little bit about this today, but the contracting process is just vital. Yeah. Understanding what's in your contract, what your liability is, and what you're required to do, what your scope of works is to get that project across the line. So there's some substantial issues in those circumstances, Matt.
There is, and I feel from what we've experienced as well in the industry is there's probably been a knowledge gap with some of those clauses and risk profiles. So builders were faced with issues that they've never been faced with before in terms of escalating costs so greatly. And what we found is that not only had financial implications, but it also had implications where they were possibly cutting corners, not fully understanding their responsibilities. So it does shed a light on those other contract clauses. What, in terms of how you guys are addressing that on projects at the moment, how long is that contract negotiation period taking now?
Yeah, well, it depends. I mean, sometimes you can get a contract negotiated in a couple of weeks, but sometimes it can actually take months because depending on the willingness of the other side who we're negotiating with to discuss and vary what they think are fairly standard terms, when they understand the ramifications that those terms have and why we might need to change or vary them slightly to mitigate risk or to set timeframes, etc. Then that can take time, and particularly for new builds, we have been involved with some large building contracts for large developments, and given the limited building pool, some of the builders are not particularly willing to negotiate with a developer on terms, and there can be argument over clauses for a period, and it can be quite difficult.
And that's a great point because we found ourselves in that situation with your team on a specific job, and the role that you guys play in that's critical because the advice you've got to have a commercial outlook to it because the deal has to be done and the contract's got to get executed. So, do you find that challenging in the sense that clients are looking to you guys sometimes going, should we give on this clause? Should we not give on this clause? Because negotiating with those contractors at the moment is quite difficult. Yeah.
The way we see our role in that process is we're not going to tell you or our clients what you should or shouldn't do. Yeah. We're going to explain the clause to you. we're going to explain the risks associated with that clause, and then let the clients make a commercial decision as to what is best for them.
Yeah.
So, a good example on a large build might be the consequential loss. So if the builder defaults under the contract, they might be liable for loss, but as a developer, we might want them to be liable for all of the consequential loss that flows from that breach, not just the breach of contract. And a builder, may not want to be involved in that. They generally don't, want to limit their liability as well. So that could be something. And then it's explaining to our developer client, well, if you had this in, you'd be better protected for these reasons. But obviously the builder is reluctant to give that because of these reasons. You need to make the commercial decision here.
Yeah. So just making sure you're empowering the clients.
Correct. Knowledge is power, right?
Knowledge is power, yeah. And I think you're best placed to identify and articulate that risk with experience. So you've seen it before, you've seen how it plays out. So you can really articulate that risk and say, hey, this was what could happen.
Yeah, so I think seeing, having been around for a period of time and seeing what can go wrong and, the ramifications of not properly contracting clauses, I think it allows us to have that experience to sit down with the client and say, look, this is what could happen.
Yep.
And that allows them to understand fully what it might.
Their choices, So in terms of clients dealing with that situation where the builders are going under or they've in a position where they've got to find a new builder, it's really understanding their risks and making sure that those risks are properly dealt with in the contract.
Correct.
Yep.
And I mean, one of the cases that we've done with you guys recently, and this kind of leads into another issue that we think builders particularly aren't properly grasping in contracts, is for a D&C contract, design and construct, if you're going to take on a design and construct contract as a builder, just fully understanding the scope of what you're doing and your responsibility to understand the documents, understand what you're going to deliver for what price, and that you're not going to be able to get variations if it's within that
responsibility scope.
Yeah, within that responsibility. So going back to your question then, particularly if you're coming in as a builder on a incomplete project, on a D&C, is understanding what's already been done on that D&C so that you know where your responsibilities are.
And closing out the certification for what's been done too.
Correct.
And all the QA. That's the most challenging part that we find we have to do in that situation. And then making sure that that's carried through in the contract requirements.
Yep.
So one of the key things that we're seeing at the moment is we've got distressed projects where we're having to find new builders, but because there's such a scarcity of builders in the market at the moment, and I'm sure some of your clients have explored this and are doing this, developers are going, well, I can't find another builder to take over. The cost of bringing a builder in is too much. It's not viable because of the risk and how expensive things are. So let me go and set up my own building business.
Yeah.
Have you guys?
Yeah, not only taking over a project, but in fact, one of the other factors is getting a project off the ground. Some people, developers, can't make a project add up and get a good builder that they feel comfortable with, and so they're starting that right from scratch or jumping in halfway through. So, it can work. It definitely can work, and it is a good option. And there's some really good examples in the marketplace of where the developer is also, taking on that building role. I guess the biggest concept from us, from a legal point of view on that, is keep it separate.
Yeah.
Separate the entity. So still have your, your developer entity, and set up a separate building entity where you've got the building responsibilities, and then do the documentation between the two as you normally would at an arm's length transaction. We've seen a situation recently where that worked really well, and they did have the development and the construction arm, the two separate entities, but they treated it like one entity all the way through, and they didn't have the documentation and the contracts and where there were extensions or variations. None of that was documented through. And it's actually going to cause a bit of a problem because, we don't have that separation. So I would think, yeah, that would be our single biggest tip.
Keeping it separate.
Keeping it separate.
Because construction can be complicated sometimes. Things can go wrong, and there's a reason why it's always been separated. So your advice is make sure it's separated.
Yeah, and we want to have the risks of building and construction with our builder.
Yep.
And we want to have the risks associated with our development with our developer. We don't want the overlap between the two. We want to keep them as separate as possible.
So a question on that I have, and it comes up quite a bit, is because the funding structure has changed a little bit on some of our jobs. Would you keep the land in a separate entity as well?
The land is usually in the developer.
Yep.
So the developer will usually own the land. I mean, there may be some circumstances, discussing with a particular client where they may want to own the land in a land-owning company and then have a development entity and then a building entity. But in most cases, the developer owns the land.
Owns the land.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so keeping it separate is one key thing. Have you seen anything go wrong with that process recently?
Yeah. Well, as I said, this particular case that we'd seen where they had the separate entities, but they didn't treat it like separate entities. So go to the trouble of setting it up properly, but then the day-to-day operations, treating it all like one. And not having that paper trail and that documentation there to support, why there was a delay from the build. Was it an extension of time, or was it, something else?
Something else.
It could be there, or variations.
It's interesting because we've seen similar issues. So the cost of the project running over time is still significant because you've still got funding requirements, you've still got loss of income, or your revenues pushed out coming in. So it is important to keep it separate because that building team still needs to complete it on time. So settlement can happen and the funds can come back in.
Or, obviously the other one we talked about was construction costs. So construction costs could have gone up.
Yeah.
And they're thinking, well, it's all one entity, so we don't really need to discuss what that is.
Yeah.
But is it a variation of the contract to increase construction costs? Is it getting passed on to the developer? Is it staying with the builder?
Yeah.
We need to have some clarity on that sort of stuff.
And some potential issues I've sort of flagged with that model is employment within that construction company, because we're in an environment now where construction businesses are being set up overnight, right, with no proper structures in place within the business. So it's all happening very quickly for a particular project. So we are seeing a lot of churn within these construction companies from an employment point of view. Resources coming in, resources coming out. Are you guys getting involved heavily at all in helping clients set up their employment contracts for the construction businesses? And
yeah, that's definitely something that OMB does. We will help with, either employment contracts or independent contractors agreements, etc. And it's important to have those things documented because, sure, when things are going well, everyone's happy, we don't need them, and hopefully they just sit in the drawer. But if you do have a dispute, we want to know, again, on this separation, right? Who are you employed by? What are the terms of your employment? And how do we deal with that?
Yeah. And making sure that the company's protected from an employment point of view. Correct. So we've seen situations where everyone's just rushed and not done that properly, and you've got enough risk in the actual build itself. The last thing you want is risk in the actual resourcing and resourcing of it. Another thing that we've seen and that we are concerned about in the market at the moment is you've got this environment where teams are coming together to construct projects for the first time, and it's a big rush and a big push to get it done. We've got a lot of pressure on costing on projects and a lot of pressure on time. We're seeing corners being cut, and we're seeing probably an increase in compliance issues and defects. So I just wanted to ask you the question as well. Are you seeing that within the projects that you've got oversight on?
Yeah, unfortunately we are. We're seeing that, defects, time overruns, variation. So if you said to me, what are the major problems that you see? Yeah, I'd say we see variations, extensions of time, and then defects or disputes post-contract.
Yeah.
And in respect of those things, I would say this: you've got to know your contract, understand what your contract requires you to do as a builder. So if you've got an extension of time, document it.
Yep.
Document the extension of time right then and there. We've seen cases where 2 years later they're trying to request an extension of time, and finding the documentation and arguing about it is terrible. If you have a variation, understand what your contract requires. In what time frame do you need to put your variation request through? What are the requirements for the client to accept it? Stick to those time frames.
Yep.
Otherwise, don't do the variation work, because I promise you'll probably be fighting about that variation at the end, and it's really tricky.
Yep.
And defects, coming back and getting builders to come back and fix problems. That continues to be an issue. And then just the disputes and the fighting going on regarding contracts. It's really important that your contract deals with the best ways to resolve that. And there's a couple of options for how, you don't want to get in this situation, but if you do, how our litigation team looks at them. We feel the best way to do it is, step one is to have a mediation. Like, get the parties together and have a chat about it. Yep. And try and get a result. And then if you don't have that, obviously you're off to court, unfortunately, which is, your last resort. Because we're finding that the expert determinations, the adjudications, the arbitrations, etc., are very time-consuming and very expensive to run. It's like running a mini trial,
Yep.
And then you still might end up in court anyhow.
And are you talking about the Security of Payments Act as well when you're talking about that process? Yeah.
So we think, setting down a process where maybe you just have a mediation, get all the parties together and try and get a result.
Yep.
Cool heads prevail, and hopefully get good representation and get it resolved. And if not, then you're running it.
I think that's a good point, because it's one of the strategies we've put into some of our contracts recently, is that process for mediation.
Yep.
And resolving a potential issue. And we've gone so far as to nominate upfront an expert noted in the contract, pre-agreed before work start on site, so that if it does go down that path, that person's already nominated.
Yep.
We
don't want to get there, right? But
you don't want to get there, but you got to plan for it.
You have to.
Yeah, you've 100% got to plan for it. We've seen, I would have said, a 50% increase in disputes in the last 24 months. A lot of them were security and payments, Security and Payment Act disputes, of which Juliet helped us quite a bit.
Yep.
with that out of your office. So where would you see most of the disputes coming from? Is it overclaiming or variations at the moment, or are you seeing a huge defect? What would be the top?
I think they're all pretty. You're right. There has been a large increase.
Yeah.
So I think it stems from, historically, builders probably not paying enough attention to what work have I got to get done, how long is it going to take me, and being really resolute on that time.
Yep.
Then if you're having problems with the time, update your program and do it early.
Yeah.
Like, update your program early. You'd know that, right? From
communicate it.
Yeah. And so that extension of time, as I said, I think that is a big one where we're fighting. The variations is the other big one we're fighting. Mm-hmm. And then obviously payments becomes a massive one as well. So
and it's interesting. You go back to fundamentals, because I can totally relate to what you're saying, because we're seeing it on our end. So time, cost, and quality, and it's really honing in on those clauses in the contract that affect time, cost, and quality, to make sure there's a process for resolution, to make sure that there's a process for for communicating the issue in a certain time period to the stakeholders. All important stuff to include.
Yeah, and I would say to builders, historically, clients may not have held you to the time strictly, and if there was a slight overrun, there was no issue. We are seeing an absolute trend from developers expecting if you give them a time, you meet the time, and if you don't, you'll pay EOTs.
Yep.
That's the change.
Yep. Liquidated damages.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah. There seemed to have been not a grace period, but a period there where developers, specifically after COVID, were probably being a little bit lenient on that. But yeah, from what you're saying, you've seen it. Yeah, that time's ending.
Yep.
Yep. And that makes sense, right? Because we've seen a little bit of normality come back into construction timing. I think there's a lot of pressure on labour still at the moment, and labour shortages. But for the large majority, a lot of the issues have been resolved in the industry in terms of those time frame pressures.
Yeah.
In terms of where you see the industry going. And I'm really interested to get from a legal perspective. I mean, you're across a number of different projects, from sales contracts preparation to construction contracts to body corporate. You see it from both ends. I mean, you would have seen all the issues with the sales contracts when we had all that cost escalation and them having to be rescinded and redone.
Yep.
You've been on the front line with disputes in relation to cost escalation from a construction contract point of view.
Yep.
So I'm just interested to see your own opinion on where you see the industry going, and what key obstacles do you think we're going to face in the next, in the next 5 years within the industry?
I think the current biggest one is getting projects that add up. So it seems to be that there are enough opportunities for developers to put a project together, but that developers are struggling to get the cost to complete in a range where they're comfortable with the total sales that they'll get.
Yeah.
So I think that is the biggest thing that's holding projects back.
Yep.
And I think that seems to be the number one thing that's going to continue, I think, for some period, even though that I think you're telling me that a lot of the problems with construction timing and costs may have leveled out a bit. But I think that's still one of the things. It was interesting what you touched on there about from the back end, what I'd call the back end, which is when we're getting sales and some of these projects are not completing on time, or that the costs are so much that the developers are struggling. It has become a lot more common that developers are coming back to the buyers to ask for more money.
More money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my experience at the moment is that buyers are well aware of the problem, and for certainty that the development will proceed, even though there is no legal obligation on them to do so, the majority of buyers are taking a really pragmatic approach and saying, hey, as long as the increase is reasonable and there's still some upside for us,
we're okay with it.
Yeah.
And do you think the main thing there is just the lack of supply in the market, or
because they're thinking, well, if I lose this opportunity,
where am I going to?
What else am I going to be able to do? Yeah. And if this is going to cost me a little bit more, but it's still, they feel under a market rate, what they could go out and get elsewhere, and there's certainty that it's going to proceed, I think they're still thinking that this is a good option.
Yeah. And I mean, it's an interesting time because on our projects, we haven't seen a huge default rate on contracts completing, sales contracts completing.
That's what happens in a good market.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've had all this volatility, but, I suppose it's interesting because you had all this volatility on the construction side and costs going up, but the default rates on sales contracts has been fairly low.
Well, that's because the market. So, if people who have bought, say, 3 years ago are required to settle today on an off-the-plan contract, they're seeing a massive capital upside. Yeah. Of course, they want to settle. The default rate is almost zero.
Yeah.
That is the problem we face in a weakening market. So if the market weakens, people have bought in a very strong market, then that contract default position gets worse. And then, obviously, the importance of good contracts comes
into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And processes.
Yes. And making sure that, that sales contract needs to be watertight.
Yeah.
And I know that you've done your own projects yourself.
Yep.
And I would really wanted to touch on, you've obviously got OMB, you're a partner at OMB,
Yep.
You run your own business, but you've actually gone out and done your own developments, and I think that provides a competitive advantage for you because you can relate to clients. You understand what they're going through as well. Sometimes when you're sitting with them, and I do feel that it sharpens your advice. Or meetings I've been with you, like I do think it sharpens your advice. What's the one thing you've learned through doing your own projects that's benefited you in your own business?
Yeah. Well, I'm not a developer, but I'm a lawyer, and I've always tried to keep that clear that I'm a lawyer, not a developer. But for example, we did build our building at OMB, and had a wonderful project manager from MG help us along the way, which was super important and vital. And I'd recommend that to busy people is to get a good project manager because we're busy people and we're looking after other people's problems. It's nice to have someone help us and guide us through our own projects and having some impartiality between yourself and the builder. But doing that project, for example, we encountered issues and, development concerns, I guess, for want of a better word, that we've seen clients have, but going through them yourself really put a different light on it.
Yep.
So, attending development meetings where the program was changing.
Yep.
Having a supply issue or a labour issue that the builder was struggling with, EOTs, variations, going through all of that sort of stuff firsthand.
Being on the cold face.
Yeah, being on the coalface, it gave us the vision of what a client would go through that process, and maybe how we could draft our contracts a little bit tighter or a little bit cleaner to make it easier for the client.
Yeah.
So that I think that you're right. It probably sharpened our focus, put us in the shoes of our clients, and maybe gave an insight to us what our clients would find more beneficial from our services.
Yeah. And why'd you do the project?
Well, I think personally it's a great investment to be able to have your own building and put yourself in as a tenant. I think the capital growth that you're able to deliver when you can, have yourself as a tenant of your own building is great, and it's nice to pay yourself rather than to pay a landlord. So we felt like it was a great opportunity. Plus we could design something that suited us and was a reflection of who we thought we were as a business. And, we get a lot of comments for those that have walked into the OMB building. It's not your typical law building. It's not your law firm. It's quite industrial and, open. And we get a lot of comments from clients about that.
Yep.
And for us, that was about starting to reflect publicly how we viewed ourselves. So not your traditional old law.
Like a branding, almost like a branding exercise for the
absolutely.
future.
Yeah. So to say, hey, we are modern, we are approachable, we understand your issues, we're business people as well.
Yep.
Yes, we've got the legal skills and the expertise to do that, but we can talk to you in your own language and, make you feel comfortable in our environment.
And do you think it's helped your business grow? Because I've seen you guys grow since you've been in there in a very short period of time, but I feel like it was you were definitely bursting at the seams where you were. I remember your old office.
Yeah.
But it's definitely probably, from what I've seen, helped grow the business.
Was it Field of Dreams? Build it and they will come.
Yeah.
They're kind of a little bit like that, I think. So, we built the extra space and we've, been filling the extra space.
Yeah.
So I think it gave us the capacity to do that.
To do that, yeah. And it's interesting. So we've seen it with other clients as well, grow into spaces, and it's amazing. Yeah, amazing how that does happen.
Yep.
They do come. Very good. Well, thanks, Simon. Thanks for joining me this morning on my podcast. It's been very, very insightful, and thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm, as I said at the outset, super privileged to be the first guest on the podcast, and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, mate. You too.